Welcome to the Factal Forecast, a look at the week's biggest stories and what they mean from the editors at Factal. I'm Jimmy Lovaas. Today is January 8th, and in this week's forecast, we've got the U.S. incursion into Venezuela, elections in Benin and Uganda, protests in Nigeria, and a South Korean court ruling on the ousted president's insurrection charges. You can also read about these stories and more in our weekly newsletter, which you'll find a link to in the show notes. Up first, we'll take a look at the situation with Venezuela. For more on that, I've got fellow Factal editor, Jess Fino. Hello, Jess.
Oh, hi, Jimmy. How are you?
I'm well. I'm better now that you're here.
Oh, thank you.
Putting you on the spot, make you talk about Venezuela first thing in the morning, or for me at least, it's afternoon there. But anyway, this situation with Venezuela has really escalated last week, and I'm hoping you can get us up to speed. So, just to start, can you give us a bit of a recap on what's happened?
I can try. So in the early hours of Saturday, we start seeing reports of explosions heard in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Shortly after, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro accused the U.S. of striking the capital and other regions in what he called at the time a very serious military aggression. This comes after months of escalation between the two countries, as we know, with the U.S. carrying out deadly airstrikes on suspected drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific, killing over 80 people. Less than 2 hours later, the U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed military strikes in the country. He also said, I think I can say to the surprise of everyone, that Maduro and his wife had been captured and flown out of the country. During a press conference later that day, Trump said the U.S. will be running Venezuela from then on until a proper transition could take place.
And what about the latest? There been any new developments?
So since then, former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as interim president of Venezuela, and Maduro and his wife have since appeared in courts in New York after being charged with multiple drug offenses. As it stands, we still don't really know what role the U.S. will have in running Venezuela. As the interim president said earlier this week, no foreign agent was running the country. And the Trump administration hasn't really given many details, apart from the fact that we'll be turning over up to 50 million barrels of oil to the U.S., which will then be sold at a marketplace.
Well, what kind of reactions to all this have you seen?
So, Jimmy, reactions have been really mixed, with many countries and entities somehow conflicting in how to respond. On one hand, many support the U.S. action of removing Maduro as the leader of Venezuela, but many others accuse the Trump administration of breaking international law by capturing a president of a foreign state, despite the Trump administration claiming that the Justice Department approved the military action as lawful. Meanwhile, there are worries that other countries could follow suit, or even the US could repeat action somewhere else. In general, countries like the UK said they supported a transition of power in Venezuela, as they did not see Maduro as the country's legitimate president anyway, but added that international law should be upheld. In terms of the neighboring countries, Latin American nations, including Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay, issued a statement expressing their concern and firm rejection of the military actions carried out in Venezuela by the U.S. Colombia moved troops to its border straight after it happened to prevent clashes and potential inflow of refugees from the country, and Brazil as well increases military presence around the border.
Well, I hate to ask you this next one and make you foresee the future, but what do you think folks ought to be watching for next then?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell, but we are carefully watching for more protests, both pro and against the Maduro regime, and a possible formal declaration of war against the US. Right now, a lot could still happen, like the closure of the entire airspace, new airstrikes, or more US action somewhere else, as Trump has threatened Colombia and resurfaced his threats of taking Greenland from Denmark, as we know. The situation in neighboring countries is particularly interesting, as Colombia and Brazil have been pretty vocal against the US actions last weekend, which is likely to lead to rising tensions between their leaders and the US administration.
Well, Jess, we'll pause there for today, but I suspect this won't be the last time we talk about Venezuela. But until then, thank you so much for your time and for keeping an eye on things for us. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Jimmy. See you soon.
Voters across Benin will vote Sunday in the country's parliamentary elections. It'll be a closely watched election considering the recent surprise coup attempt. Benin, often held up as an example of democratic stability in West Africa, despite recent political tensions, was rocked by an attempted coup by a group of rebel military officers in December. Order was restored hours after a group of soldiers seized the country's state broadcaster and declared they had taken control of the country amid reports of gunfire in the capital. Military support from Nigeria and other ECOWAS members, including Ghana and Ivory Coast, helped quell the insurrection. It followed a string of 8 West African coups in 5 years. Pro-government parties hold control in the country's National Assembly following the 2023 election, with all 109 seats up for election on Sunday. Now, parties loyal to President Patrice Talon are expected to retain a majority in parliament, with the process closely watched for any irregularities. Talon, who is serving a second term as head of state, does not intend to seek re-election in the country's upcoming presidential election, scheduled for April. The National Association of Nigerian Students has called for nationwide protests on Wednesday. They condemn controversial tax reforms that came into effect at the beginning of the year. The organization has accused the federal government of ignoring public concerns and constitutional processes and is calling for a suspension of the reforms. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu resolved to push ahead with these reforms, despite criticism over alleged inconsistencies between the version of the bill passed by Parliament and the copies later distributed. The reform stipulates, among other measures, the consolidation of more than 70 separate taxes into a unified framework, and the introduction of progressive rates for income tax. The government argues changes could lift non-oil tax revenue by about 30% over the medium term, but opposition have framed the reform as punitive and disproportionately impacting a population already struggling with cost of living. Now, the protest on January 14th is likely to draw large numbers as people come to grips with what the tax reform means in practice. There is a high risk of escalation, especially in urban areas where unemployment and high living costs are more apparent. General elections will be held in Uganda next Thursday to elect the country's president and parliament. Seeking re-election to a 7th term is President Yoweri Museveni, Africa's 4th longest ruling head of state, who has previously scrapped age and term limits in his rule dating back to 1986. Facing off against Museveni will be singer and activist Bobi Wine, who lost the 2021 election to Museveni before claiming widespread electoral fraud. Though initially barred from running by Uganda's Electoral Commission, Bobi Wine has since been confirmed as a candidate. Now, Museveni's government has moved to crack down on media coverage of anti-government protests and have detained opposition supporters in the run-up to the election. That after the deadly protests coinciding with the last election in 2021. Concerns also exist that Ugandan authorities will cut internet access during next week's elections in order to prevent Bobi Wine's supporters from mobilizing, though officials have denied these plans. Museveni's government has also moved in recent years to pass draconian laws targeting Uganda's LGBT community, threatening life imprisonment or even death penalty for certain same-sex sexual activity. The Seoul Central District Court is set to deliver the verdict for former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol next Friday. Yoon became the first sitting South Korea president to be arrested in January last year, following his short-lived martial law declaration in December of 2024. The former president was impeached by the parliament and removed from office after the Constitutional Court upheld the parliament's decision. The ousted president was charged with leading an insurrection by declaring martial law in the absence of war or national emergency. Several former cabinet members and senior government officials were charged alongside Yoon for conspiring in the insurrection. Now, insurrection is one of the few criminal charges from which a South Korean president does not have immunity. If convicted, the former president could face life imprisonment or even the death penalty. As always, thank you for listening to the Factal Forecast. We publish our forward-looking podcast and newsletter each Thursday to help you get a jump start on the week ahead. Please subscribe and review wherever you find your podcasts, and we'd love it if you'd consider telling a friend about us. Today's episode includes work from Factal editors David Wiley, James Morgan, Alex Moore, and Hua Shea. Our interview featured editor Jess Fino, and our podcast is produced and edited by me, Jimmy Lovaas. Our music comes courtesy of Andrew Gosby. Until next time, if you have any feedback, suggestions, or events we've missed, drop us a note by emailing hello@factal.com.